5:30 p.m. Monday, June 3rd, the Senate proceed to votes in relation to the two amendments in the order listed, that there be no second-degree amendments in order to either amendment prior to the votes, and that there be 2 minutes equally divided between the votes.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. That the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection. Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I want to start by thanking Senator Whitehouse, who has shown such strong leadership on the issues that we're going to be discussing this afternoon, which is how do we get out of the sequestration box that we're now in. I also want to thank him for joining with me in sponsoring the Cut Unjustified Tax Loopholes Act, which can do so much to address the problems which we're going to be discussing here today, and including the need to move forward on solutions to our budget deficit and to ending sequestration. And I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that following my remarks that the senator from Rhode Island be recognized for his remarks on this subject.
Without objection.
Mr. President, at the beginning of March, when Congress's failure to reach a compromise on deficit reduction triggered sequestration, some in Congress were ready to declare victory. Sequestration will take place, and I'm excited, said one member of the House of Representatives. It's going to be a home run, said another member of the House of Representatives. And this will be his first significant Tea Party victory, said a third member of the House of Representatives. Well, sequestration may be a victory for the Tea Party, but it isn't a victory for the American people. It's not a victory for the men and women of our military and their families. Over the past 2 months, the Senate Armed Services Committee has heard testimony from our highest-ranking military leaders, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Army Chief of Staff, the Chief of Naval Operations, the Air Force Chief of Staff, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the combatant commanders who are responsible for our forces in Afghanistan and Korea and around the world. And each of these military leaders told us that continued sequestration will damage our security and harm the troops that they lead. General Dempsey, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned us, quote, if sequestration occurs, it will severely limit our ability to implement our defense strategy, it will put the nation at a greater risk of coercion, and it will break faith with men and women in uniform. He warned us that continued sequestration would, quote, destroy military readiness. General Amos, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, told us that, quote, sequestration will leave ships in port, aircraft grounded for want of necessary maintenance and flying hours, units only partially trained and reset after 12 years of continuous combat, and modernization programs canceled. The result, he stated, would be a lapse in American leadership. And General Odierno, the Chief of Staff of the Army, told us that, quote, sequestration will result in delays to every one of our 10 major modernization programs, the inability to reset our equipment after 12 years of war, the unacceptable reductions in unit and individual training. It will, he continued, place an unreasonable burden on the shoulders of our soldiers and civilians. And he said that if we do not have the resources to train and equip our force, our soldiers, our young men and women, are the ones who will pay the price, potentially with their lives. The Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force warned lost flight hours will cause unit stand-downs, which will result in severe, rapid, and long-term unit combat readiness degradation. We have already ceased operations for 1/3 of our fighter and bomber force. Within 60 days of a stand-down, the affected units will be unable to meet emergent or operations plans requirements. The Vice Chief of Naval Operations told us, quote, in FY13 we will reduce intermediate level ship maintenance, defer an additional 84 aircraft and 184 engines for depot maintenance, and defer 8 of 33 planned depot level surface ship maintenance availabilities. At our shore bases, he continued, We have deferred about 16% of our planned FY13 shore facility sustainment and upgrades, about $1 billion worth of work. By the end of FY13, he said, nearly two-thirds of the fleet will be less than fully mission capable and not certified for major combat operations. Mr. President, we rely on the men and women of our military to keep us safe and to help us meet the U.S. national security objectives around the world. We expect our men and women in uniform to put their lives on the line every day, but in return, what we tell them is that we will stand by them. We will stand by their families. We will provide them the best training, the best equipment, and the best support available to any military anywhere in the world. Sequestration in fiscal year 2013 is already undermining that commitment to the men and women in the military and their families. Now, there may be a few people who, hearing all of this, might still consider sequestration a, quote, victory. But members of the Armed Services Committee who've heard this testimony, Democrats and Republicans, believe that the continued sequestration is a grave mistake. These cuts will damage our military readiness, restrict our ability to respond when crisis erupts, restrict our flexibility in confronting national security threats from Iran to North Korea to international terrorism. And these cuts will cost taxpayers in the long run, because maintaining our military readiness today is far less expensive than rebuilding our military readiness tomorrow after it's been squandered. Sequestration's devastating effects are also felt in other of our agencies and departments. These effects are going to harm students and seniors and farmers and families across this nation. Continued sequestration will set back our slow climb out of recession, as well as education and medical research and health care and public safety. As former Defense Secretary Panetta told our committee in February, it's not just defense, it's education, loss of teachers, it's child care, it's about food safety, it's about law enforcement, it's about airport safety. Now, the desire to avoid this outcome is, I believe, bipartisan. And that is why it is so baffling to me that some of our Republican colleagues still refuse to allow us to take the necessary next step to avert this continued damage by refusing to allow a House-Senate Conference Committee to meet, a meeting in which members of both chambers and both parties would work to resolve differences between the Senate and House-passed budgets. A few Senate Republicans are objecting to the search for a solution to sequestration. For reasons I do not understand, they are objecting now to the normal budget process that they previously urged us on with such energy to follow. Now, it is truly baffling because just 2 months ago we heard from some Republicans that it was a travesty that we had failed to pass a budget. They called failure to pass a budget was an outrage. And now that we've passed a budget, a few of our colleagues across the aisle are preventing us from going to conference so that we can work out our differences with the House and finalize a budget. Those colleagues want a guarantee in advance of a conference in which they will get their way on a number of issues, or else they say they're going to prevent the conference from even occurring. They want the rules of the game to guarantee that they're going to win even before they agree to play. Now, the budget resolution is no game, but the analogy is apt. I can't understand the reasoning. I just simply can't understand that reasoning, but at a time when our national security is challenged on so many fronts, and we face the effects of sequestration that I've outlined, this isn't just illogical. It makes responsible governing impossible. It's harmful to our nation. Getting to conference and working out our differences is simply essential. And I'm very much encouraged that some of our Republican colleagues have come to the floor to point this out. They have spoken forcefully, admirably, courageously about the need for the Senate to move forward. They give me hope. Those Senate Republicans who have come to the floor and urged us to go to conference and urged those that are blocking our move to conference to remove the blockage have a mission which I hope succeeds. Now, I've spoken on this floor on a number of occasions about what I see as the proper path to sensible deficit reduction, and that's the reverse of sequestration. A significant majority of Americans believe that we need a balanced deficit reduction plan to dig us out of the hole that we're in. Such an approach would include some additional discretionary budget cuts, but prudent prioritized cuts, replacing the hatchet, which is sequestration, with a scalpel instead. Such an approach would include reforms to entitlement programs, and it would include revenue. Budget experts of all ideological stripes know that additional revenue must be part of our deficit solution. And by closing unjustifiable tax loopholes, such as those that my permanent subcommittee on investigation has outlined in detail on a bipartisan basis, we can provide tens of billions of dollars for deficit reduction that does not require us to raise the burden on working families or on the men and women in uniform who put their lives on the line to keep us safe. And that kind of revenue will help us reverse sequestration, part of a solution to this budget crisis that we're in. A balanced approach to deficit reduction is the approach of this budget, the approach to this budget, which this body passed on March 24th. And I hope that this position prevails in conference when we get to conference with the House. I would hope the Senate position prevails, but I can't even believe that members of this body would consider obstructing the budget process until they were given a guarantee that they could get their way. It is the wrong way to govern. Most of us know it. You can't guarantee in advance of a conference that the conference is going to have your outcome. If you want to instruct conferees, fair enough. And that's what the effort has been here on the part of the Democratic majority leader. But for some members of this body to insist that unless they're guaranteed they'll get their way in conference, or else they're going to block us going to conference, is not the way that we're able to get anything done here. If we all took that position, we'd never get anything done. And this obstruction does a disservice to the men and women who serve in our military and to the people of this great nation that they protect. Their position is as damaging as it is illogical. I hope that they will soon relent to logic, to the needs of the nation, and end the objection to proceeding to conference with the House of Representatives, because that is the way that we can try to work out our differences, finalize a budget, and take the necessary steps towards deficit reduction and the end of sequestration. I thank our presiding officer, and again, I thank Senator Whitehouse. It's his initiative that brings us to the floor today. It's his initiative which has cast a light in so many ways on the budget dilemmas we face, but also the solution to these challenges. And I yield the floor.
Mr. Chairman. The senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. Chairman, let me first thank Chairman Levin for the immense amount of work and passion and good thought that he has put into trying to accelerate the day when we can say good riddance to the sequester. He sees firsthand, as chairman of the Armed Services Committee, how much damage the sequester is doing to the military, to the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines who honor us by their service, to the talented and loyal civilians who support their efforts. But, Mr. President, families all across the country are also feeling the painful consequences of this sequester. Just in my small state, Rhode Island, 8,100 folks have already seen their weekly unemployment checks reduced by $50. For a family struggling to get by, losing $50 can hurt. And federal rental assistance has been eliminated for 500 low-income Rhode Island families, which may cause some even to lose their homes. Economy-wide, our nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that the $85 billion in sequester cuts this year will cost us 750,000 jobs nationwide. We have 12 million Americans out of work already. Why on earth would we want to cut 750,000 more jobs? As Chairman Levin said, it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, Leader Reid tried twice to bring up measures that would get rid of the sequester, but twice Republicans filibustered. And now they refuse even to allow the process to go forward that would negotiate a solution through the regular legislative process. They won't even let us appoint senators to negotiate a compromise between the Senate and the House budgets. It has been 61 days since we passed our budget, and each time we try to move the process along, Republicans object. And if their rule is, I have to have it my way before I'm willing to enter into negotiations, and I need a guarantee, I'd like some of that deal too. I've got some things I feel pretty passionately about. And if they want to play by those rules, then we should all be playing by those rules. If not, then let's follow the regular order and let the process of democracy work. From government shutdowns to federal default, the other party has a strategy to manufacture one crisis after another, each time holding our economy hostage to demands for really radical policies that the vast majority of American people reject. They demand the end to Medicare as we know it. The American people want no part of that. They demand cuts to Social Security. The American people want no part of that. And they refuse to close a single, not one, not a single corporate tax loophole. Well, huge majorities of Americans want that to happen, but our friends don't care. They are extremists. It's not just the American public, by the way, that rejects the extremist Tea Party agenda. So do economists. And what economists say has been confirmed in practice by the experiences of other nations that followed the Republican austerity strategy. Republicans say budget cuts are necessary to reduce the deficit, but their fervor ignores the established economic effect that has during a recovery. Right now, for every dollar we cut, the economy shrinks by more than $1. Their theory is that when you cut a dollar in government spending, that releases the economy to grow more rapidly. Well, the fact of the matter is, during a recovery, the exact opposite is true. And the way this is measured is through an economic phenomenon called the fiscal multiplier. There have been a number of recent studies that try to identify what the fiscal multiplier is right now, and they range from 1.4 to 3.7, which means that for every $1 you cut, the economy takes a $1.40 hit. There's an extra 40-cent harm for each dollar of cut to our national economy. And if this one is right, 3.7, then every dollar you cut is $3.70 worth of harm to our economy. It is a multiplier of damage from government cuts. So shrink the GDP, which you do if you have a fiscal multiplier over 1, and collect less taxes. And less taxes means less of the deficit reduction that is supposedly achieved by the budget cuts. It is a vicious cycle that could keep our economy weak and our deficits high. You can go backwards, and Europe proves it. From Spain to Portugal to Greece, countries slashed their budgets and things got worse. Double-digit unemployment and negative growth. We have a U.S. unemployment rate of about 7.5%. That is way too high, but it is way better than 27% in Spain, 27% in Greece, and 16% in Portugal. We had 2.3% growth last year. They had negative growth rates. negative growth rates. Their economies contracted. The evidence from the austerity experiment is in. Countries that cut the deepest hurt themselves the worst. As you can see, employment in the Eurozone is worse by about 20% since the major austerity programs kicked in. Over that same time period, unemployment in the U.S. is better by about 25%. Their policies, employment worse by 20%. Our policies, employment better by 25%. A lot of these Republican calls for harmful austerity cited a 2010 paper called Growth in a Time of Debt by Harvard economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff. Republicans loved Reinhart and Rogoff. They cited them at least 6 times on the House and Senate floors to justify their demands for budget cuts. They can't get enough of Reinhart and Rogoff. Well, turns out there's a big problem. There were numerous errors in Reinhart and Rogoff's computations, math errors, programming errors, dropping a column of data. Oops. With the fiscal multiplier over 1, the best thing we can do to accelerate our recovery is to lift the harmful European-style sequester cuts. The Job Preservation and Sequester Replacement Act of 2013 would do just that through September 30, giving us time to negotiate a broader compromise. Co-sponsored by Chairman Levin, Chairman Harkin, Senator Lautenberg, Senator Merkley, Senator Schatz, and Senator Warren, it would replace the sequester with deficit reduction from the Buffett rule and from closing corporate tax loopholes. Sensible tax changes that on their own we should do because they'll make the tax code fairer. The Buffett rule would ensure that multi-million-dollar earners pay at least a 30% effective federal tax rate. Last year, we debated whether the top income tax rate should be 35% or 39.6%. But the fact of the matter is that many at the top, people making hundreds of millions of dollars in a single year, won't pay anything close to that rate. Why? Because the tax code is riddled with special provisions that favor ultra-high income earners. For example, investment income is taxed at the special rate of 20%, and the so-called carried interest loophole allows billionaire private equity fund managers to pay this low rate. So many of them pay the same tax rate or even less than a hardworking average firefighter or brick mason in Rhode Island making $50,000 a year. $200 million a year paying the same tax rate as folks making $50,000 a year. The Buffett rule follows the common sense that people earning millions of dollars a year, even hundreds of millions of dollars a year, should pay higher tax rates than middle-class families. And it would also cut the deficit by $71 billion. Another loophole, the so-called Edwards-Gingrich loophole, lets high-earning professionals dodge paying payroll taxes by calling themselves corporations. We closed that too, saving another $9 billion. We save another $3 billion by going after a deduction that allows private jet owners to depreciate their planes faster than commercial aircraft are allowed to be depreciated. Another common sense change. The fourth part of the proposal would contribute $24 billion to lifting the sequester by ending tax breaks for big oil. Over the past decade, the 5 largest oil companies have reaped over $1 trillion in profits. That's trillion with a T, $1 trillion in profits. And while they're making that massive, massive profit, they nevertheless pull strings in Congress to keep billions of dollars a year that regular taxpayers have to cough up for them in tax giveaways. As with all of the elements in this bill, repealing big oil giveaways is something we should be doing anyway, just because it's the right thing to do. Finally, we end a tax break for companies that ship jobs overseas. Believe it or not, the tax code allows manufacturers to indefinitely delay paying taxes on profits from overseas operations. Ending this unfair and un-American advantage would lower the deficit by another $20 billion. Each one of these 5 reforms would make the tax code fairer for all Americans. They're each worth passing for that reason alone. They are embarrassments in our tax code. Getting rid of them could stop the sequester while Democrats and Republicans work together on a balanced deficit reduction package. If, of course, we could get Republicans to actually work with us and negotiate and go through the regular order they have claimed for so long to seek to get to a balanced and negotiated deficit reduction package. But, as Chairman Levin pointed out, at the moment they refuse to even appoint conferees to begin the process. They want to be assured that they will have it their way before they even begin to negotiate. As I said earlier in the speech, if that's the way they're going to behave, I want some of that action myself. I have things I feel very strongly about. And I could be in a position to say, I won't allow us to go to conference either until we're clear that we're going to never do chain CPI and put that burden on our Social Security receiving seniors. I could do that and say we are never going to go to the conference until I get a guarantee that we're going to get a carbon fee so that the big polluters are paying their share and that we're not having to subsidize what they're doing to our atmosphere and oceans. I could say those things. Any one of us could say those things.
The Senator just yield to a question.
I yield.
If that position were taken by all of us, that is a guarantee of inaction.
That is a guarantee of total gridlock and failure. And that is why it's so important that no one in this body try to use that kind of hostage-taking extremist tactic rather than allowing the regular order to continue.
And since I've interrupted the Senator, let me ask just one additional question. I noticed that even though your menu there yields $127 billion, that you only require $85 billion for the one-year sequester replacement, which means that, for instance, if just the Buffett rule were put in place, which is a tax fairness approach, plus the bottom one, which is a tax break for offshoring, that those 2 items out of this menu, and there's many other items which are not on your menu, that those 2 items alone could reverse sequestration for a year. And I just want to make one other comment, if I could, about offshoring, because my dear friend from Rhode Island knows that my permanent subcommittee has done a lot of work on the tax breaks from offshoring. In addition to what the Senator said about delaying tax on profits, under our tax code, companies which move jobs overseas get a tax deduction for the cost of the moving. If they're building a plant overseas, the cost of that plant can be deducted currently. And this is perhaps the most stunning thing that I've learned fairly recently, it's even possible under our tax code for the cost of operation of that facility to be deducted currently, while the tax on the profits or the income of that operation are delayed, which means they can cut their domestic taxes by the cost of running a foreign operation currently. Now, that takes a little bit of gimmickry to do it, but that's what's going on. And I just wanted to kind of fill in that one little element of some of these offshore bonanzas, these incredible loopholes that are in the tax code. And as the Senator from Rhode Island says, we should get rid of some of these things even if we had no deficit, because, as the Senator put it, they are an embarrassment.
Nobody has spent more time and more energy and put more effort into the way in which American income gets hidden offshore so that people can avoid paying taxes and corporations can avoid paying taxes than Chairman Levin. He is our expert on this, and there indeed are other loopholes that are exploited primarily by corporations, but also by very high-income taxpayers, hiding money in the Cayman Islands, putting assets into Ireland and other tax havens, and refusing to treat them as American, even though it's nominally an American company. There are innumerable tricks. And I'll close by making one point. Very often people look at what we're trying to accomplish, and even actually pretty honest reporters will say, well, the Democrats actually want to raise taxes. That's the fight. Republicans want to cut spending, Democrats want to raise taxes. No. We raised taxes once already. We raised the rate for the people over $450,000 a year in the last big agreement. What we want to do now is to go into the tax code and close down the loopholes. That is all we're looking for. And what most Americans don't understand is that if you look at how much money goes out the back door of the tax code, through loopholes, through special rates, through exemptions and so forth, it's very nearly the same amount of money that's actually collected through the tax code and becomes the revenues of the United States of America. We let almost as much money out the back door of the tax code as we collect through the tax code. And if you take a look at the areas where Chairman Levin has done so much good research, that money actually never gets into the tax code to go out the back door. So if you were to count that in addition to the money that's allowed out the back door of the tax code, there is actually more money that goes out the back door of the tax code and is avoided coming through the tax code than is actually collected as the revenues of the United States of America. So it is a big, big number. And the refusal of the Republicans to let us attack one single loophole, not one loophole, every loophole is sacred right now to them, I think is unjustified. And I hope that the people of America understand we are not looking at more tax rate increases. We are looking only at closing these loopholes, and it is a rich field to pursue because more money goes through that than actually gets collected. And you can bet, if you're an average American, that when those loopholes were being carved into the tax code, you were not in the room. The special interests were in the room. And that's why a lot of people want to defend them, but it's also a very good reason for making a more honest tax code that gets rid of these loopholes. But our friends want to do crisis manufacture, and they want to do crisis manufacture so they can force feed bad economic ideas that Americans don't want on all of us. And I think we need to resist that. And I yield to the chairman.
If, again, my friend would yield, the name of the bill which you have co-sponsored is called Cut Unjustified or an Unjustifiable Tax Loopholes. There's plenty of tax deductions which are totally justified. Mortgage interest is justified, accelerated depreciation. There's all kinds of contributions to charitable deductions. These are justifiable tax deductions. And what we're talking about are the unjustifiable ones which shouldn't be there. And as the Senator points out, we're not proposing tax rate increases. From the way I phrase it is, I'm talking about collecting taxes which should be paid. Not increasing taxes or the rates of taxes, but collecting the taxes which in all justice really should be collected by Uncle Sam. And again,
let me thank the chairman for allowing me to join him today. He has shown great leadership in this area, and I'm privileged to be here with him today. I yield the floor. And I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate's in a quorum call. They have spent the day working on amendments to the Farm Bill, a number of votes throughout the day. They also voted earlier today to approve President Obama's nomination of Srikanth to be a judge on the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. And as this quorum call continues, we're going to show you some of that debate from earlier today on the Senate floor.
Mr. President, I grew up, that's what I wanted to be as a baseball player as I was a boy, but I didn't take long till I learned that I wasn't big enough, fast enough, or good enough to be the baseball player of my dreams, but that hasn't taken away my love of the game. I followed it so closely for these many years, and I followed it really, really closely. I was a cheerleader for any team that Greg Maddox was on. He came from Valley High School in Las Vegas, was almost immediately was a star baseball player in the major leagues, and whatever team he was on was the team that I cheered for. I've been here in Washington now for a number of years. They've had, in recent years, a professional baseball team. I'm reminded, Mr. President, when I was going to law school back here and working in this building, I went to Griffith Stadium and watched baseball games. I only watched two, but I watched the Washington Senators play the New York Yankees twice. Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, all that crowd. So I remember that. In recent years, in fact, the last 2 years, I have focused on the Nationals a lot because of another phenomenon from Las Vegas by the name of Bryce Harper. And he's meant so much to that team, as we learned last night. He's recovering from running into the wall at full speed, hurting himself. But last night he was the reason they won. He hit a home run and a double in the 10th inning and made a sensational catch. He's really very, very good. The reason I mention that, Mr. President, Davey Johnson is the manager of the Washington Nationals. He's managed 5 different Major League Baseball teams. He's one of the greatest managers in the history of baseball. Won pennants, won national championships. But what would the Washington Nationals be like today if he didn't have the ability to have the players he wanted? That someone would say, okay, you can have your third baseman, Ryan Zimmerman, but you have to wait. You're not going to get him at the beginning of the season. You can wait until August. We'll let him come in August. Or their first baseman, LaRoche. He's a good first baseman, Golden Glover, but you can't have him for a while. Wait for a few months and then we can bring him on. Well, that, Mr. President, is an example of what is going on here in the United States Senate. The President of the United States does not have the team that he wants, the team that he deserves. Yesterday, my friend, and he is my friend, the minority leader, offered a full-throated defense of the dysfunctional status quo here on Capitol Hill. Here's what he said, quote, I think we've demonstrated there's no real problem here, end of quote, talking about the Senate. This he said yesterday on this floor. Congress has an approval rating that I don't even like to talk about. It's real low. Senator McConnell stood on the Senate floor and said things here in Congress are going just fine. I think it's safe to say Americans disagree. And, Mr. President, I'm on their side. Senator McConnell is free to defend this Republican-created logjam that exists in the Senate today. But I'll not join him in this defense. The problem of gridlock in Washington is real, and it must be fixed. I'm committed to making the Senate work again. These remarks I'm giving here today are only in an effort to get this body to work well. There's nothing sinister in what I'm saying. I just want the Senate to work well. I've been here a long time, Mr. President, and it didn't work this way before. Despite the agreement we reached in January of this year, Republican obstruction on nominees continues unabated, no different than it was the last Congress. The Minority Leader used strong words yesterday, accusing me of going back on my word. I take that accusation very seriously. It's true that in January Democrats and Republicans entered into an agreement. Republicans agreed to cease the endless obstruction of presidential nominees. They agreed that they would work with us, quote, to schedule votes on nominees in a timely manner except in extraordinary circumstances, end of quote. Now, Mr. President, this is what he said, Minority Leader said. I just quoted that. He said it this year. I repeat, Republicans agreed they would no longer block the President nominees without extraordinary circumstances. Mr. President, look at the dictionary about extraordinary circumstances. Here's how it's defined. Going beyond what is usual, regular, or customary. That's not some definition I came up with. That's the definition in the dictionary. Extraordinary is defined as going beyond what is usual, regular, or customary. So, in return for their saying that's what they would do, we agreed that we would not consider any changes to the Senate rules outside of regular order. Democrats have kept our word. We intend to keep our word. We've not altered the rules. But since we entered into that agreement, Republicans have failed to hold up their end of the bargain. What they have done this past 5 months has not been usual, regular, or customary, as defined in the dictionary. Not only have they failed to work with us to schedule votes on nominees in a timely manner, they're doing everything in their power to deny the President his team and thus undermine Obama's presidency. So instead of throwing about accusations, let's look at the facts. Let's stick to the facts. Republican obstruction has slowed down nearly every nominee that President Obama has submitted. Even cabinet secretaries have faced unparalleled procedural hurdles, and Republicans are threatening to block many more of them. For example, in the some 230-plus years we've been a country, for the first time in the history of this country, while a war is going on and one is winding down, for the first time in the history of this country, Senate Republicans filibustered the nomination of Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, who, by the way, is a Republican and, by the way, is a Vietnam hero for his combat activities there and was a Republican senator from Nebraska. The Minority Leader himself is threatening to block President Obama's nominee for Secretary of Labor, and he said so. Secretary of Labor is a good person.